Hello, everyone. Welcome to LeadHERs in Tech. This is the podcast where we're celebrating and learning from prominent women in technology. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Shabri Lakhani, a standout leader in tech and sales. Shabri's a really key figure in the SaaS industry, recognized in 2022 as Management Today's 35 under 35, which is incredible. Her journey includes over 13 years of sales and sales leadership, including founding and leading SalesWorks, which is a global training and consulting firm that she successfully sold in 2022. So we're going to chat today, and we're planning to explore Shabri's path from being an ambitious young leader and influential entrepreneur. And we're going to delve into some strategies for building and driving our own self-worth as women in the tech space. So, Shabri, thank you so much for joining us. It is a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Brilliant. So I'd like to start today by really thinking back to the early days of leadership for you. Stepping into a leadership role at only 22 years old, can you share how this opportunity came about and how you navigated that step up so early in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was an SDR, and it wasn't a very well-known role back then. So actually, I think it was called an inside sales associate or executive. I can't remember now, but the role of an SDR essentially. And I did that. I did that very successfully for 14 months, and an opportunity came up for an account executive role in New York. And the GM at the time, I used to be in the office quite late, and I used to get chatting to him because he was also at his desk and we were all open plan. And we got chatting and he put me forward for an AE role in New York. And I genuinely thought all my Christmases have come at once. New York's one of my favorite cities in the world. Like most SDRs, I wanted to become an AE. And they sent me out there for a few weeks, twice actually. And I got offered the role. I had a contract, and the role, it fell through for product reasons more than anything else. And I was absolutely devastated. I thought there's not going to be any opportunity like this. And then weeks later, my manager came to me and said, we've got budget to grow the team. The team was only 3 people. We've got budget to grow the team. So we're going to make a team leader role in Europe and Americas. And is that something you're interested in doing? And so as one door closed, another one opened. I was a team lead for a couple of months and then became a manager. And that's essentially how I got into it. But I definitely dealt with the silent and not so silent questions and opinions of my much older, mostly male colleagues of how can someone that's only 22 be an effective
Mm.
leader? Um, and that was something that I felt really self-conscious about because I didn't have an answer for it, right? Just because I was really good at being an SDR, who's to know if I was going to be an effective leader?
Yeah.
So I dealt with a lot of, I think I felt like I had to work quite hard, and I was quite conscious about working longer hours and things like that, which I'm sure you laugh, but I'm sure you've gone through as well. But yeah, I think that almost having to prove myself was certainly there.
Yeah. And especially partially around how you got to that point from being in the office late and developing that relationship with the GM, then only cements the need to carry on doing that activity. That's so interesting to me because it's very similar actually to my experience. I had my first direct report when I was 21 years old. So that was outside of the SaaS industry. But then when I came into the SDR role, a couple of years after that, I was first SDR on the ground. There was no structure in place beforehand. And it was very much like come in and figure out what this role looked like for us. A bit like you, there was an opportunity for us to grow the team to 3 people. And actually, they didn't put a role out for team lead. I asked for it. I guess unlike you, you were shifting from that decision of, do I want to go as an AE? Do I think I'll even be good in leadership? Is that the right path? I always knew I wanted to be a leader. So I think that may be why I kind of went for it. But for you, that's a very different job role. How did you come to the decision that you actually did want to go for it in terms of the leadership path?
So I love what you said about you knew that you wanted to do that. And I think maybe I started having that self-limiting belief so early on, which was, well, there's no way I could possibly be a leader now. And maybe that's something I want to do in my 30s or later on in my
Mm.
career. But I didn't know that was an opportunity that was available to me. So actually, I look back on that now and I think my career would have been very different had I taken that AE role. And so I'm a big believer in things happen for a reason. The opportunity felt almost too good to give up. There was definitely those self-limiting beliefs of, well, how on earth am I going to do this? My
Mm.
manager was going on maternity leave, so I had no manager. So there was all this sort of stuff of, well, how am I going to learn what to do? Who's going to be there to support and guide me? Even though we were in a $1 billion company, we didn't have the resources and infrastructure in place. I was actually the youngest manager they'd ever had. So there was no
Wow.
program for first time managers. And I think I almost thought this is too good to give up. This is something that I thought I would do in 10 years' time. I'm going to grab it with both hands. And that's why I think I accepted the role at a lower pay than benchmark. Mm.
Mm.
And I think that was a mistake I made because I thought I should be lucky to have this and I'm going to take that. And I look back on that now and I'd give my younger self very different advice about that. But
Yeah.
it's easy to that and sit here and say that, 12 years later.
Yeah, of course. Let's come back onto pay in a moment because you mentioned something just then that I want to dig into a little bit more. You spoke about how your manager had gone on maternity leave and you didn't have her there for guidance and support. And actually, when I'm thinking back to those days in the UK, SDR was still a very new role,
Yeah.
and 360 reps were more common than SDR teams. In those early days, in situations where there is limited advice available, how did you find guidance and find mentorship?
I struggled. I did struggle. I think we are now in an environment where there are tons of communities, right? There's SDR leaders, there's sales confidence. I mean, there's Pavilion, there's everything.
Mm.
There wasn't that, 12 years ago. So I remember I found a management course in this like dive near Euston Station. I Googled manager courses and I went to HR and I said, I'd like to go on this. And I got all sorts of objections about budget. And it was £1,000. And I thought, I've got to do this, right? And if my company aren't going to pay, I invested in myself and I did it. And it wasn't necessarily 100% relevant to managing inside sales and sales development teams, nor was it necessarily 100% relevant to tech, but it was a leadership course. So I had people from all different industries there. And I did that, and that moved the needle a little bit. But I remember I was walking into an interview and I had been up the night before Googling how to run an interview. And so Google became my best friend. And I laugh about it now, but I remember those situations where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I think what I focused on was what I think I'm innately good at. So I think I'm empathetic. I'm good at reading people. I'm good at connecting with people. And I think I'm good at winning the hearts and minds of people. And I think that was maybe why I was good at sales. So I started to focus about that, about connecting with my team, about understanding what motivates them, about understanding how to connect with them, understanding their why. I was good at giving feedback. And I think that's where the empathy piece comes in. So I started to focus a bit more on that. And I thought, okay, the other stuff of, how to build a headcount plan, I can sort of pick up, right? And so I
Yeah.
focused a little bit more on the innate qualities. And then I was quite proactive in getting a mentor. So I had one mentor internally and one externally. They weren't SDR leaders, but they were very experienced business and sales leaders. But the other thing I would say is that I actively seeked feedback. And this is advice I'd give to anyone. However, I think being totally candid, I look back on that now, and I'd be curious if you faced this as well, Emily. But I think because I was young and I was female, I think people thought they could say things to me that I don't think that you would say to a middle-aged man. And I think I say that with some caution about asking for feedback, but I think people gave me a lot of feedback, which was good. But I think that just proved my passion to prove myself almost.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually what I think's really funny is that when you were going into that interview, the person on the other end of the interview has probably been up all night panicking and prepping about going to meet this incredibly wonderful person who they're a little bit in awe of, who's a leader at such a young age and therefore must be amazing. And actually on the other end of it is someone who's probably equally as nervous about this session that's taking place. But yeah, I resonate so much with everything that you're saying because we do have a similar start in that sense. Actually did have a direct report say to me once, I don't like the fact that you are a woman and you are younger than me. I don't think it's right. And you know what? It's not just that. That was shocking enough. What's the most shocking part about it is that that person said that when HR were in the room.
Oh my
I mean, they lost their
god.
job.
Yeah.
They were almost pretty much fired on the spot. But the fact that you said about people saying things that they would not say to other leaders, and that's just one very extreme example where someone bluntly outright said it, but there's so many other off the cuff comments that actually build up and combine to make you feel almost like, do I really deserve a seat at this table? And that can weigh quite heavily on you in your own mind as well, especially if you're already having your own battle of, do I deserve to be here?
100%. And I think, you get the direct comments like you really unfortunately experienced, but I think things that used to really wind me up was what I call microaggressions.
Mm,
So in meetings, in leadership meetings, someone would sort of make a jokingly comment of, "Oh, you won't remember that movie, it's way before your time." Or, "Oh, well, I'm old enough to be your father," type thing. And actually
right.
you don't really think that they are a big deal, but you don't know how to react to it. I would never dream of saying that to someone. And I think now we're at a different stage where I think we are seeing a lot more younger people go into management and go into management earlier. But I think I bit my tongue quite a lot, and I think I was trying to find what type of leader do I want to be. And someone said to me before in a management meeting that I was too opinionated. And you think to yourself, would you would you say that to a guy? I'm not sure you
Mm,
would. I'm not sure you would. And so I think we pinpoint words like ambition as negative. And I think I'm ambitious, like you're ambitious, but I don't think that's a negative thing. That's a spark. Doesn't mean that you need to be ruthless. So I was trying to find what kind of leader I wanted to be. And you're afraid to be too nice because then you're seen as weak. And so you want to be authentic. As someone in my early 20s, I was changing and growing a lot as well. So there's
yeah.
no static place.
Trying to figure out what leader you want to be when you probably don't even know what kind of person you want to be at that age, really. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about pay. I think that's a very interesting topic to talk about, especially when people are getting promoted internally rather than getting external opportunities. So when I first stepped up to SDR leader, the pay increase was not enough to notice in my payslip each month. And actually moving to another company was the moment when I realized the value of the SDR leadership role because I doubled my salary. And that shocked me because I was so surprised that the previous company hadn't valued me enough to pay me that. How have you seen the internal versus external promotion impact people's earning potential?
I mean, great question. I think it is always a struggle when you're internal. And unfortunately, I think it's worse in bigger companies because I think bigger companies are almost, they create their own ring fences with, tons of benchmarking on salary data and how much can we give each person per year. And I was exactly the same as you. So it was not enough for me to notice a massive difference. I did that role for I think it was about 15 months. And then I got offered a promotion and relocation to Dubai. So it was to go and start and set up the team for Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific, which I did. You don't pay tax in Dubai. And
Mm.
they they almost treated that benefit
Oh,
of the country as, sort of baking my salary increase into that. Which again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I look back on that and I think, how naive was I? Right. And I
yeah.
prioritize that experience and that learning and all of that sort of stuff. And so I did that for 3 years. And I then got offered a promotion and relocation back to London. I didn't get the pay rise that
Yeah.
I benchmarked. So I see it as a massive challenge, and I did that for 18 months, and candidly, I found out that both of my male peers who had targets and a team size that's a third of mine, so my team and target were 3 times bigger, they were on double what I was making, and that hurt. And for a company I'd been at for almost 8 years, had a number of conversations around, a plan and a movement and all that sort of stuff. And it was almost the promise of jam tomorrow. I decided to vote with my feet and I left. And I, I wouldn't change that whole experience for anything. It would be great to have made more money, but it taught me a lot. And I think females are more likely to accept small salary increases and sort of prioritize that experience and learning and development like
Mhm.
I did. And I think companies can do a much, much better job. I think because I think also they talk about a role a lot internally, and then the person gets really excited about the role, and then the last thing you discuss is money. And so
Yeah.
then, like almost like I did, you just say, "Okay, I'll take it," and we just sort of settle. So I think it's a big problem, and I know from chatting to you previously, it's a problem as well. But I'm curious to hear what you think on the topic.
Yeah, I think that what you've just described there, you've stacked on internal
Yeah.
promotion after internal promotion, which arguably is stacking a problem on top of a problem, showcasing that you're at a company where you can grow. You're clearly doing really well because they want to keep promoting you and keep increasing your responsibility. But ultimately, let's face it, we're both very new to sales and SDR, this world. You don't know you should be saying. You don't know what you should be asking for and what that benchmark is. And obviously you found out about the situation, which I knew what you were going to say, but I did not know the extent of what you were going to say. So that still shocked me. How can people recognize that they are being undervalued when this information isn't transparent for them to see? What kind of signs might there be in a company?
I think now, at least there is a lot in the industry that I see ooh, for SDRs and AEs on benchmarking data, right? So I do think there is that does exist. I think it's important if you're joining a company to understand what is the process for pay rises. So your expectations are managed when you start. There's nothing worse than you joining a company as a frontline manager and you think you're going to get a pay rise next year and the company's like, okay, we're in startup mode. It's going to be 2 to 3 years before we can review these again. So have that conversation up front. Look at benchmarks, look at data, and there's the power of the community. I personally, I'm quite British like that. I find talking about money really awkward. But I do think there is all SDRs talk about all their salaries and all AEs talk
Yes,
about
true.
their salary, right, which blows my mind. But there's the power of the community. So find a couple of people in your network who you trust and who you know. And then also think about what's realistic, right? So let's say as a hypothetical, you're making £50,000 a year and you find out that other people in other companies are on more. it's not realistic for a company to move you to 80 grand next week. That's just not realistic. Okay. Having run a business, I know, about budgeting and all that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
be realistic. I'm sure you have as well, Emily, but I've been on the receiving end of a lot of conversations about pay rises. I've been on the receiving end more than I've been on the delivering end. Um, and the bad ones are really bad, okay? Sort of demanding entitlement, and expectations are way off. The good ones, I actually want to go out of my way to help this person. So I think a lot of it is how you approach the conversation as well. So I think if you if you approach the conversation well, it doesn't automatically mean it's a yes, but your chances are much, much higher than if
Yeah.
you approach the conversation with demands and entitlement. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And going to the conversation with credible data,
Yeah.
examples of how you've gone above and beyond, what is it going to bring to the business? Because at the end of the day, it's a business and somebody is going to have to sign this off about whether this is a financial risk to the business. It's just like going and trying to sell something to a prospect with no value, with no kind of business case. People have to, I think, come forward with that reflection on actually why do they deserve that additional money. I suppose it does go back to the reason why they're walking into the room and what emotional aspects are at play. Because if you do have that knowledge that someone else who's doing the same job as me is being paid more, there's probably a lot of resentment there that might be fueling some of those negative types of behaviors. Yeah.
100%. And I'm a big believer in fairness. So that's how I like to operate as a leader. And so for me, when I saw myself working 10, 11, 12 hours a day and being treated like that, you then do start to think about value and worth and all that sort of stuff. And is this really an employer and a company that I want to stay at?
Yeah.
But I'm sure people would have reacted differently. Some people would have done the same. But I knew for me that was triggering my core values.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Alongside the financial aspect, there's another factor that was at play specifically for me. I thought that the biggest change when I stepped up from being that first time SDR leader to moving companies and doing it again was going to be the financial shift. For context, I worked outside of London for my first SDR role. I moved into a role in London. So that does contribute to the big jump, obviously. But I thought that finances was going to be the main thing. And actually, it wasn't. The biggest surprise was this significant shift in my credibility internally within the company. It felt like I was no longer the SDR that got promoted. And I was now considered to be that external expert who they'd brought into the companies when I was being invited into meetings and saying, Emily, you're the one who knows about SDR. What should we do about this? And that experience for me worked wonders for my confidence and for my self worth, just really giving me the ability to say, I actually do know what I'm doing. I'm not just someone who was given a chance. I was given a chance, yes, but now I'm not that person anymore. I've had time to learn how to do this role and I do have things I can bring. And I'm so glad that happened. But if I hadn't moved at the right time to the right company who really did value me, I don't know how I would have established that credibility as a leader. And I wonder, as someone who's stayed within the same company for 8 years, how you went through that. I'm not just the SDR who's been promoted anymore, and I do have a place here.
Yeah, so it's interesting to hear your experience from moving to another company because you almost get to sort of wipe the slate clean, and we've hired someone externally, and you can position yourself. I think when I moved from an SDR to an SDR manager, and I'm still in the London office, that was tricky because and most of my colleagues were significantly older, mostly male, and I was still, I think, seen as Shabri the SDR. And it's really difficult to say, well, actually, no, I'm running this team now. I think when I moved to Dubai, that was almost similar to your experience because it was
Yeah.
almost in company. It was an intercompany transfer, and they relocated someone. It was from head office, right? So I kind of had that gold star almost. And that was similar to your experience, where I was like, okay, I do know what I'm doing, and I've done it in Europe and Americas, and they've sent me out here to do it in 3 more regions. I think self-doubt is something that doesn't go away overnight, right? This is normal. And I think self-doubt is different to imposter syndrome. That's where you feel like an imposter, you feel like a fraud, and you're
Yeah.
not worth that promotion or that pay rise. Self-doubt contributes to that, but self-doubt is a lack of faith. And of course I had it, right? So if it was, okay, you've moved to the region now and you need to build a go to market strategy for how we're going to target lending institutions in Africa. Okay, I'm obviously going to have self doubt about that. I don't know the region at all, but I have self doubt about skiing. I can't ski. So it's about how you build out that competence. And I think what was interesting regionally, which I was surprised about, because everyone talks about how those regions that I moved out to aren't as progressive. I found it very different. I felt like I got a seat at the table and I was worthy of that seat at the table. I was seen as a peer to the rest of the regional leadership team. So I think it varies. And then when I moved back to London, I almost still carried, despite what I had done, I think because of my age, I still carried that almost like Shabri the SDR title
Is
from
back.
people who did, yeah, she's back. So it's tough. And I think that is going to exist if you do stick around in an organization for as many years as I did. And what you did was brilliant because you got to move to a different company where you were Emily, the expert that we've hired and we've brought in.
Mm. Yeah, it did. It made a big difference to me. One thing that you mentioned about that self-doubt made me think about the statistics around women not being as likely to put themselves up for promotions or put themselves up for roles unless they have all of the qualifications. And I always thought to myself that that was something to do with imposter syndrome, but actually, in now that you've been talking about the self-doubt, I think potentially that's more of the factor that's at play. I'm really keen to get some actionable tips for the people who are listening today in how we can make sure that women are able to, represent themselves in a way that's aligned with their own value for themselves. So when we're thinking about women don't apply unless they meet all of the qualifications, I've heard people talking about that for literally years, but I haven't heard many people talking about how we can overcome that when we've got women who are thinking about a new opportunity internally or externally. What is your take on that stat? How do you resonate with it? And do you have any tips for what people can do to try to overcome that fear of applying?
That stat is probably the one that I quote the most when I'm speaking to, people I mentor, people I coach. That stat is, unfortunately, I can see how it's true. And I've seen it with companies that I've been advising recently. My advice for people, my advice for females leaders that, are potentially battling with that now, remind yourself of what you've accomplished. I think it's really too easy to go through experience in your career and devalue it. So remind yourself of what you've accomplished. And I think the other actionable tip I would give people is find your superpower. We all have one. So find your superpower. Like what I was saying before about how, I tried to focus a little bit on what I was naturally good at and what I enjoyed doing and what was easy to me. Everyone's got a different superpower, so find yours. And self worth is a superpower because it's what drives you forward. And be unapologetic. When I started SalesWorks, I was about to start doing a piece of consulting work, and I met he was a friend of a ex colleague, and we were chatting, and he was ex recruiter turned founder. And he asked me, he said, "So what is your day rate?" And I told him, and he said to me, "Oh my God, no ways. No one's going to pay that up." And I dug into it, and he said, no one's going to pay more than a certain amount. It was so much lower than what I had said. And I ended up charging 5 times more than what he had said. And I just
Yeah.
decided to just ignore what he said. I'm
Good.
either gonna win the business or I'm not. Simple as.
Yeah.
You know, I was unapologetic about the rates that I charged. I was delivering huge value. So have that conviction. I think you'll find it easier. But I remember this was about 6 years ago. I'd met a founder and we were talking about roles, and he said, are you interested in joining, I'm looking for a leader of pre-sales, sales operations, sales enablement, and sales development. So it was like a 150-person organized function. And I said, I've never led pre-sales before, and I've never led sales operations before. And he said to me, I'm less interested in what you've done, and I'm more interested in what you're looking to do. And that was such a powerful moment for me, because I thought, actually, women do focus on, oh gosh, no, I haven't done that before, so there's no way I could possibly do that.
Yeah.
And that was a man that was sitting across the table from me that said, don't worry about that. What is it that you want to do? And that was really powerful for me.
It's actually interesting because if you've never done something before, so you say you can't do it, you'll never do it. And
100%.
at some point you have to try the new things. I'd like to try new things just a little bit at a time and just build my way up. And sometimes you take on a new bit of responsibility and it feels huge and scary. During COVID, the person who ran the sales ops side of the business got put on our furlough scheme, and I took over from her in that area of responsibility, as well as leading the SDR team. And there's absolutely no way I would have applied for a role that involved that responsibility because I've never done it before. But I actually really enjoyed it, and it was hard, and I did not have a clue what I was doing. And thank goodness we were using HubSpot and not Salesforce, because there would have been no chance. But I was best friends with HubSpot support. I was talking to them every day, and I just had no choice. I had to learn how it worked. And I think sometimes there's that benefit of diving in the deep end and
Yeah.
the excitement and the learning that you can get from that experience.
Those experiences, like that story you just told, like those are the ones that you're that have like helped shape you in your career and who you are today, and then
Yeah.
encourage you to go and do it again. It's the first one is always the hardest, isn't it?
Always the hardest, definitely. So you've just spoken about great story about somebody saying you can't charge that. That's way too expensive for you. And I've had people say things. I had one of my ex-partner's mothers say, You can't be earning that money. You're too young to be earning that money." And just but yeah. You start to try and have a conversation, you built yourself up for this conversation. It's already nerve-wracking. You're already asking for something that you don't necessarily feel comfortable asking for, or it's new to you. And then somebody says something with such conviction that makes you feel like that's a stupid thing to suggest. And how can you bulldoze past that and carry on without letting it get inside your head? Because it sounds like you did that, but I want to know how you got through that moment.
Everyone's got an opinion, and if you ask everyone for it, you'll get a number of different opinions, and you have to decide whose opinion do you value and who do you not value, and be selective about that. So, what I said earlier about, find a mentor, find a sponsor if you can within your organization, someone who's vouching for you, but find a mentor and find some people in your network that you trust and that you can rely on and that you value. I think for me, in that particular moment, I was going through this conversation, and when that person said to me that they'll never pay that, I thought to myself, well, that's an isolated piece of feedback that I have chosen to not listen to. And
Yeah.
whilst I think that was my decision on that one, I really could have easily listened to it. So I think go into the conversation knowing what you want. I've been on the receiving end of conversations before, and you might have been as well, where I've had a rep say to me, I want a pay rise. They don't know how much they want. They've got
Yeah.
no idea in their head. They just want more money.
Yeah.
So that's a tricky one for a leader because I don't know if we're miles away on expectations. And I think the other piece of advice I'd give is I've always appreciated when I haven't felt like I've been backed into a corner by a rep asking me for something. I've always appreciated a heads up, like someone saying to me, "Can I put some time in your diary tomorrow? I'd like to have a conversation about my financial progression here."
Yeah.
Great, because I keep my homework in the background, especially if you weren't there when they joined or you don't know the history. So that would be the other thing is like try and approach the conversation from the same side of the table as your
Yeah.
leader. I don't know many leaders up at night thinking, how do I screw my team over financially? That doesn't exist. Okay. So, people are going to want to help you if it's possible and if it's the right thing to do. The other thing I'd say is it's not all about money. And whilst I've talked a lot about money and pay rises in this conversation, I focused on collecting skills, but have a think about the non-monetary things that are important to you as well that can make you feel valued. And again, like have some ideas of what those are to you. Don't expect your manager to come up with everything.
Yeah. I think the example of the rep that comes into the room saying they want a pay rise, I was listening to that thinking, I don't think they want a pay rise. I think
No.
they just think that the pay rise is what's gonna make them feel better, and actually there's something else that they want, because if it was a pay rise for a specific amount, they'd have probably done the research and know exactly what they want. Maybe it's kind of recognition, maybe it's more responsibility, one of the many things that people can be motivated by. But it is important because I think, yes, we have spoken about salaries a lot and about money, but there are many other reasons why you can be motivated, and why extra responsibility is important, and why in certain environments sometimes you do take a little bit less money because of the learning, because of the growth opportunities. So weigh up what is most important to you, but also making sure that you don't compromise on things that are going to later down the line make you feel demotivated or
Yeah.
like you're not valued, because one agreement to go for a lower salary and then 2 months down the line you're resentful of the company because you don't think that you're paid enough, it's not going to work out, and it's not going to create the best environment for growth and development.
And I think it also about knowing if the answer is no in that conversation or not right now, knowing your worth and knowing, well, okay, is that something that you can deal with, or is that something that you can't? In my case, I decided enough was enough. But I've had it before where someone said to me, if I don't get a 10K pay rise, I'm going to start looking elsewhere. Was like, okay, that's not something that I
Yeah.
can do right now. That person stayed in my team for another 9 months. So, I think there's ways of approaching that conversation and knowing your value. And there's something that I saw on social media recently, which I thought was really powerful. And it talks about a bottle of water. And it's a bottle of water in Costco is 30p, and a bottle of water in the supermarket is 50p, and in a bar it's £2, and in a nice restaurant it's £3, and in a hotel minibar it's £5. And the bottle of water is the same. The only thing that's changing is the place, and each place
Mm,
is giving a different value to the same product. And if you don't feel that you're getting what you think you're worth in one place, that means they're not valuing you. Change place.
yeah.
And I thought that was really powerful because I've been in the scenario where I'm like, "I got £5 for a bottle of water." But
Yeah. Yeah.
I like and I valued it. I wanted it right there.
Yeah.
And so, if one place doesn't value you, doesn't mean that everywhere's going to be the same.
That's really good advice, definitely. So, we're almost through the conversation today, but before we go, I do have one final question which we ask to all guests. What is the best piece of advice that you have received from a lead her in tech?
So I received this when I was starting my own company, which I think has been invaluable to me. And it was play to your strengths and let other people handle your weaknesses. And the reason that resonated with me so much is because early on as a founder, I was trying to do everything. And I think as females, we often try and do all of it because we don't want to put up our hands and say we don't know how, as we've talked about in this conversation. And that's not an effective way to be a leader, to be a business owner. That was a really powerful piece of advice that I got.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. I truly believe that some of the most successful people are the ones who can use the people around them to their strengths and get people to work for you. You actually were doing that because people really were working for you, but I think you can do that even if they're not employed by you as well. That's so good. I honestly think that we have been through some very poignant topics today, and I'm hoping that people who are listening are going to get a lot of value from this. We've spoken about internal promotions, establishing credibility, leadership roles, empowering women to advocate for themselves in the workplace. And they're all really valuable lessons for our listeners to take away. So thank you again for taking the time, sharing your wisdom with us. I do truly believe that leaders like you are the ones that are paving the way for more women to step up. So thank you for sharing your voice and inspiring others.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you. Really, really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of LeadHERs in Tech. Your support means the world to us, and we're incredibly grateful for the opportunity to share these empowering stories with you. If you're listening on a podcast platform and you believe in our mission to amplify the voices of women in tech, please take a moment to leave us a rating. It really helps us grow and reach more listeners. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with others. Anyone watching on YouTube, engagement makes a big difference, so please subscribe to our channels and give this episode a like and share. If you resonated with any of the topics today or have some similar experiences, then we want to hear from you in the comments section. Let's keep the conversation going. Your contribution is not just a favour, it's a powerful step towards change. Remember, every story shared and every voice heard can ignite a spark in someone's career. So, if you know an amazing woman with a story that needs to be heard, please nominate them. Thanks again for listening and for being part of this journey.